Hello, everyone, and welcome to What is Kabbalah? Over the next 4 weeks, tonight included, we will delve into the mystery and the mystique of Kabbalah. It's a buzzword that's thrown around very often amongst Jews and non-Jews. And while it is a tradition, part of the Jewish tradition, part of Jewish study and exploration, as we will find out over the next few weeks, in the last 30 or 40 years, it has become extremely popular within the spiritual society, those that seek advanced spiritual connection, meditation, and healing have looked to ideas from the Kabbalah for answers in life. And we're here to try and clarify what is Kabbalah? What is the real Kabbalah? What is the diluted version of Kabbalah? What are the differences? From where does it take its value? And most importantly, how can it be effectively used to enhance everyday life? That is our goal over the next 4 weeks. And I think that it's important to preface by saying that when dealing with a holy edifice, any holy body of work, such as Torah study and Jewish mysticism like Kabbalah, it's important to have sensitivity. Sensitivity allows us to explore something with very refined perspectives. And if you don't have that sensitivity, you often can misinterpret, misconstrue ideas, and they lose their original definition. And that is something that we're going to try and express over the next few weeks. The need for sensitivity in studying Kabbalah and exploring some of these deep spiritual concepts related to ourselves as human beings, concepts related to our connection with God, and what God is. What does the word God mean? Is that a big old white man standing behind a curtain like you might see in The Wizard of Oz? What is the definition of God? How does God create the world and continue to infuse it with life and energy, and so on and so forth? So these are very nuanced, very sensitive ideas, very important ideas, of course, and ones that can greatly enhance our everyday life. And if one is Jewish, their Jewish experience, but very delicate. And from an anthropomorphic perspective, anytime you use terms to try and explain God, you run into the pitfall of limiting God in human characteristics. And that's definitely one of the challenges in Kabbalah as well. So I want you to keep that in mind, that as we move through these next few weeks, as we delve deeper into Kabbalah and what it is, it's important to recognize that this is a very sensitive subject and one that requires great delicate hands, if you would. And that's part of the challenge, that when you take something that's sensitive and you take it out of its general construct, it often loses its meaning. We know that in life today, context is everything. Without the right context, it's very, very hard to understand what a word might mean. And Kabbalah, first and foremost, is part of the Torah. And therefore, not understanding it within the context of the Torah, but seeing it as an independent item already sets us up for a challenge. And so our talk is going to be on what Kabbalah is as part of the Torah, not its own independent idea, but rather one of the dimensions of Torah study. And using that, we will be able to explain how it has become so popular, why it's essentially more relevant today to the masses than it was over the last few centuries, and how you and I can use it and incorporate it into our everyday life to bring real change, because ultimately any discussion about any subject should leave us with something concrete that we can use to change our life. So with that, let's get started. As I said, Kabbalah is a dimension of the Torah. And one of the beauties of Torah study is the fact that Torah study can be explored on so many different levels. And I want to mention that as I'm talking, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. If you're viewing us from our website, chabadchaicenter.com, if you click and view this on YouTube, you'll see a group chat open on the right side of the page. You can use that to post any questions, and I will see that in real time and be able to answer those questions as they're asked of me. If you're viewing this video after it's been broadcast live, you can still post your questions underneath, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. Or you can email me directly at askmendy, ASKMENDY @gmail.com. So back to our discussion. Torah study happens on many different levels. In the Talmud, it says that there are 70 different dimensions to the Torah, which is why you have so many different rabbis, leaders, men, women, arguing vehemently about how to properly interpret the Torah. And that's one of the things that we value. We credit that in Jewish life because that enables us to reach a deeper level of understanding because of the process that we go through in order to reach that comprehension. But generally, the Torah is split up into 4 different dimensions of study, known as the Pardes. Pardes means an orchard. And the word Pardes has 4 letters, Pei, Resh, Daled, and Samach. And those 4 letters are an acronym for the 4 words, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, 4 Hebrew words. So we're going to explore what each word means specifically. The first, the P, or the Pei, stands for Pshat. Pshat means simple. And everyone understands that when you're studying Torah, you study it from a literal perspective. God said, let there be light, and there was light. I understand literally what happened. And the same could be applied across the vast study of Torah from a very literal perspective. Then we move on to the R, Par, the Resh, which stands for Remez. Remez is when things are not literal, but rather alluded to, okay? So it's a hint. And so the fact that the Torah might speak in certain terminology hints to me that there is something else that's trying to be taught here. And so we in life use hints all the time when we're trying to say something, right? Our wife might tell us that, by the way, I have a very special birthday coming up in 2 weeks. Why is your wife telling you that you have a special birthday coming up in 2 weeks? Or that she has a special birthday? She is hinting to you, hopefully you're getting the message, she's hinting to you that you need to go out and start preparing either a party, a gift, or probably both. So hinting is something that we use all the time, and the Torah does as well. It tells us certain things clearly and unequivocally in a very literal fashion, but then it also hints certain ideas to us as well that we need to work a little harder to understand. That's level and dimension number 2. Then there's dimension number 3, and I apologize for any background noise. There is a little bit of noise going on. Number 3 is drush. So we have pshat, literal, remez, hinting, drush. Drush is allegory. Allegory. So as opposed to your wife saying, I want a gift, which would be the simple, the literal, or saying, honey, by the way, my birthday's coming up in 2 weeks. That would be your wife hinting to you that you need to get her something. She might tell you a story and tell you a story about there was once upon a time a couple, Jack and Jill, that were married to each other. And it came time for Jill to celebrate her birthday. But Jack forgot the birthday. And as a result, Jill was very sad. And because Jill was sad, Jack became sad, and they did not live happily ever after. That is an allegory, telling you a simple story, but under careful introspection, you can easily deduce the fact that this is not a story simply being told for story's sake, but rather to hint that it's time you check when your wife's birthday is and make sure that you are prepared for it. So The Torah uses that in its arsenal as well. And therefore, you can study each subject, each topic, each verse from a perspective of allegory. That is the Pshat, Remez, and Drush. But Pardes has the fourth letter, which is the Samach, which stands for Sod. And Sod means the secret, the hidden dimension. So what is the secret, right? Because the word secret here can be used in two ways. On the one hand, it is the secret of the Torah. The secret because it is not clearly visible in the words of the Torah. One must study in depth, one must understand much background, and one must have received tradition, transmission from previous generations to see the mystical aspect inside of every word of the Torah, but it is there. The word secret also has another meaning in this context, because for centuries, Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, was only taught in secret. It was only taught amongst small groups of people with their rabbi carefully guiding them every step of the way. It was never taught to the masses until recently. And of course, we'll talk about why not previously and why yes now. But that is the fourth dimension of Torah study. So you see quite clearly, as I prefaced in the introduction, Kabbalah is not a subject on its own, but rather the deeper dimension of study and exploration of the Torah, the secret or hidden dimension, the sod of the Pardes. Now, just as a human being is a composite, every human being is a composite. We are a fusion of a body and soul, you and I and everything else that lives here in existence. And while our souls may be slightly different, we all have those two dimensions to us. The dimension of the body is quite clearly seen. You look at a human being and you see arms, you see hands, you see feet, you see eyes, ears, and so on and so forth. You see the body right away. The soul, however, is not as clearly visible. Yet, our belief is that the soul is at the core and giving life to all of the other aspects of the human being. Their intellectual aspect, their emotional aspect, their physical life. Everything is a reflection of that soul and therefore inspired and energized by that soul. And therefore, though the soul may not be seen readily, its effect is seen in every aspect of our life. Kabbalah is the same way. When you look at the Torah, you see those simple literal translations and definitions. You might even see some of the hints that the Torah is providing to you, but you don't readily visibly see the soul of what the Torah is telling you. Unless you spend time really exploring, or you listen to a class or have a transmission from a scholar of the previous generation, you do not necessarily get the soul of what the Torah is trying to tell you. And as a result, you can often look at the Torah and see the mechanics, the body, the ceremonies, the traditions, the steps and the processes that are required and obligated of us, but you sometimes miss the why. And not getting the why, not getting and understanding the goal that you are trying to achieve through these various steps, through these processes, leaves you at a disadvantage. And that is one of the beauties of Kabbalah, is that it provides for us the why, the what, as to the process and the steps that we are taking. So let me give you an example. One of the fundamental traditions in Jewish life is to put on tefillin, two black boxes that men typically put on, one on their arm, one on their head, every weekday. Similarly, women have traditions like lighting candles, baking challah, family purity, and so on and so forth. So you may know the literal steps required to perform the various traditions. You may know them well. However, trying to understand why a person would put on two black boxes of leather on their arm one on their arm, one on their head every morning. Why they wouldn't do it on the Sabbath and on holidays is very peculiar and strange. And if someone didn't spend the time to understand the deeper significance, they probably would not be enthused to perform this tradition. And so it's very important that people spend the time studying and exploring to understand the soul of Judaism. And that's what Kabbalah is. It is the soul of Judaism. It explains what is the meaning and significance of each tradition. How does it directly enhance my life and make me a better person? How does it empower me to then go out and change the world? How do I use these traditions to help guide me in me accomplishing my mission here on earth? These are the questions that plague us all. And understanding the Kabbalistic dimension to the Torah, the mystical dimension, seeing the soul of Jewish life and Torah study helps you answer some of these questions. So though it may not come to you more readily, it is very important to spend the time to try and understand it. Now, in exploring deeper dimensions of the Torah, our goal here is to inspire people towards positive action. Torah study is not an academic exercise. It's not something we do simply because we want to further our knowledge in and of itself. Study is designed to enhance and enthuse action. Action is ultimately what counts most here in this world. That's the way God created the world. So everything we do has to be seen in that light. How does it enhance the action? There's another school of thought when it comes to action and how do we inspire action, and that was known as the Musar movement. Musar was a movement within Jewish traditional Judaism, thought to scare people to do the right thing, and it used fear as a tactic to keep people within the tradition. And it was quite simple. If you want to be connected to God, this is the way you have to do it. And if you cease to perform the various traditions simply because you don't like them, you don't understand them, then you are disconnecting yourself from God. And as a result, you will amount to nothing. And your life will be of lesser value and lesser quality, etc., etc. And there were many, many very respectable rabbis that used that as a tool to try and keep the Jewish people engaged in their faith. However, Hasidic Judaism, taking its inspiration from Kabbalah, found that rather than focus on fear as a method to keep people adhering to their traditions, love and the power of connection could be just as powerful and actually more powerful and accomplish the same thing in a more positive environment. And as a result, starting 400 years ago, Hasidic rabbis, and we'll talk about this in greater detail next week, right, started to use Kabbalah as a means to inspire people, to show them that there was real connection, real spiritual connection in every mitzvah that they did, regardless of how deep and lofty their understanding of tradition was. They could tap in to the spiritual treasure that was there in every single mitzvah. So Kabbalah is definitely something that has the power to inspire us, to move ourselves beyond our day-to-day life. And that is very important because for those of us that have children or jobs, we all have different routines. And when you live a life of routine, it becomes quite monotonous. It becomes very challenging for someone to be able to uplift themselves out of that routine, beyond that day-to-day grind, and really connect with something deeper. But Kabbalah, because it is something otherworldly, when we study it, when we explore this deeper mystical dimension, it has that power to take us out of our confines, out of our daily grind, and put us into another dimension. And that's another value that you'll find as you study more and more Jewish mysticism, as you study more Kabbalah, that it has that power to uplift you to another dimension, take you to another place. And every once in a while, it's important to do that, because if you don't, you get sucked into that daily grind. Your life becomes defined by the 9 to 5 and everything else that happens. And it's simply one day after the next. You can't figure out when it stops, when it starts again. You look back at your days, weeks, months, and you can't really see what you accomplished and what you did. They all blend together. Nobody wants to live a life like that. And so it's important that you find a method that uplifts you beyond the madness. And studying Kabbalah has the power to do that. So Hasidic philosophy, right? Of course, Chabad is a Hasidic group, and Hasidic philosophy was built on the premise that God appreciates the joy and sincerity of a simple person just as much as the deepest and most philosophical study of the intellectual. That was the advent of Hasidic Judaism. And we're talking about 400 years ago. Prior to that time, Jews were living primarily in Eastern Europe. The community there only respected those that had this intellectual capacity for deep and lofty study. And simple people were relegated to the back. And Hasidic Judaism came along and said, no, it's not just about what you can study. It's not just about what you know. It's about who you are. How do you live your life every day? Do you celebrate your faith in God? Does your faith express itself in all of the dimensions of your life? And those simple people that couldn't study and understand, they might have even been illiterate, because we know education was scarce at that time. Those people were respected and valued because they fully connected themselves with their faith. Their faith expressed itself in every aspect of their life. And that was more valuable than those that were intellectual but didn't really celebrate their spirituality, didn't really express their faith on an everyday basis. So Hasidic Judaism, with the goal in mind of inspiring people to better connect, inspiring people to have a more meaningful relationship with their faith, with the traditions, to see the value in every tradition and how it moves your life forward, straight Kabbalistic ideas, but in a very practical and pragmatic fashion. And so when you're studying about the deepest aspects of creation, how God created the world, the process by which this world came to be, how God went from purely spiritual to embodying himself in a physical world, and we know that is a very detailed process. But when we study this, the goal is not simply to understand it from an academic perspective, but rather to understand it as relating to me in my world. Because the more I understand about God, the more I can connect with God, the more it becomes a reality in my life. And that's ultimately the goal in any study of Kabbalah. The same thing could be said with understanding the Kabbalistic content of a mitzvah. Understanding why I put on tefillin and why it's made out of leather and why it has 4 scrolls and why I wrap it 7 times around my hand and so on and so forth is not for academic purposes, but rather to enthuse my performance of that tradition from that point onward. And so Hasidic Judaism, Chabad specifically, uses the parts of Kabbalah that can be most easily explained on a practical level, that can be most easily transfused into real energy. You and me are then able to take the study and apply it to our daily lives. That is the goal in Kabbalistic study from a Hasidic or Chabad perspective. Now, what are some of the common misunderstandings about Kabbalah? Because there are many, without a doubt. If you are to Google the term Kabbalah, you'll find a wide range of results. And unfortunately, most of them are really very, very unreliable. Some people think that it's witchcraft or magic. One of the stories that reinforces this misconception is the story of the golem. Those of you that have visited Prague might be familiar with the old synagogue, the Altenschule, and the story is told of the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Loew, who was a very accomplished scholar. And at the time that he lived in Prague, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. Most notably, the blood libel was being used aggressively to incite riots against the Jewish people. And so he created a golem, a man formed out of clay, and he used Kabbalistic ideas in order to be able to do this. Now, of course, this is beyond the scope of our, you will not be able to make a golem at the end of our 4-week class, because if I did have that abilities, of course, I would put it in the marketing. But stories like this that have been told with special tzaddikim, special righteous leaders throughout history, have sometimes lend credibility to this misconception that Kabbalah is a form of witchcraft or magic. Couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth. Kabbalah is not about creating miracles. It's not about making people out of clay or so on and so forth. It is about the deeper dimension to the Torah. Now, of course, people that as they were able to reach these more spiritual levels of understanding, as they were able to understand more and more about the creation of the world, it did give them special abilities in those specific times, but that doesn't necessarily define the study of Kabbalah. Another question that's commonly asked is, do you have to be Jewish to study Kabbalah? And I think this is an important point to, as a rabbi, obviously, most of my work is done within the Jewish community, and I believe that Jews have a very personal responsibility to study and explore as much of the Torah as possible, because it directly enhances their everyday life, as they're obligated to try and follow it as best as they possibly can. Now, for somebody that's not Jewish, of course, they're not required to follow the commandments and the traditions. We don't proselytize. We don't seek to convert people. However, Judaism has universal truths that can be applied to everyone and enhance everyone's life. And in fact, most people will tell you that Judaism introduced ethical living, the value of life, to the world. Before Abraham and monotheism and so on and so forth, it really didn't exist. So, of course, Jewish study can be very powerful and very meaningful for anybody, Jewish or non-Jewish, and Kabbalah is the same way. It won't necessarily enhance the way they put on tefillin or light Shabbat candles, as those are traditions that don't apply. However, there are definitely many ways that it can understanding of their personal mission in life. It can enhance the inner struggle that they experience and help give them ideas on self-mastery so that they can make better decisions in life. That, without a doubt, could apply universally to Jew or non-Jew alike. So I welcome anybody that's watching this live or later that's not Jewish to take this 4-week journey together with me. People ask me about Kabbalah water, right? Where can I buy Kabbalah water? Now, Kabbalah water is a simplification of the Kabbalah, and it is very sad. For those of you that may be familiar with the Kabbalah Center, it was started in Los Angeles. This was simply a commercialization, a dilution of something very special, very spiritual, very holy, and it was done quite successfully, which is the greatest tragedy, because that enabled it to spread further and further. They're now cover the country. And, when you take something that's very meaningful and very special, and something that has real value, of course, even if you dilute it, it still has value, and people picked up on that. So Kabbalah was being taught as a standalone idea, unrelated to the rest of the Torah, unrelated to the rest of Judaism, and many celebrities in Los Angeles bought into this. Many of them were very spiritual and loved this idea of being able to connect to a Jewish, transcendent idea. And once the celebrities bought into it, it became very popular with the general public. And so red strings and special water and energy bars and anything else that could be sold to make a profit for those people that were trying to commercialize Kabbalah became quite common. But of course, there's no such thing as Kabbalah water, and Kabbalah is not about these one-off ideas. It's not about special chants and incantations that you say that make you rich or make you find your loved one. That is not the idea. It is but rather a discipline, a study that helps you understand the deeper dimension of the Torah and the deeper dimension of who you are in your relationship with God. So if you signed on, I apologize, there is none. Okay. Some people think that Kabbalah is now a trend religion, right? People think that Kabbalah is something to stand alone on itself. And of course, as we've clearly explained, it is not. And anytime you try to take one discipline outside of the greater context, eventually it's going to collapse. It's almost like somebody that wants to be in better health. So rather than exercising and eating right and so on and so forth, they focus all of their time and energy only into one dimension. Or somebody that's training that wants to get in great physical condition, right? But rather than doing cardio and also doing strength training and then doing things for their core and flexibility, they focus only on one aspect. They're not going to get the results that they are looking for. They're not going to develop the fitness level that they're looking for because they've taken one aspect of healthy living out of the context of being healthy. And of course, that can never sustain itself. Kabbalah is the same way. Okay, so you want to study Kabbalah. What do? You understand that it's part of Jewish tradition. You understand that it's holy and spiritual, that it's a deeper dimension of the Torah. Do you have to be 40 years old? That was one of the commonly known requirements to study Kabbalah, that you have to be 40 years old. And just putting this out there, disclaimer, I am not 40 years old. And so it's important to clarify that we are not studying, nor am I teaching raw Kabbalah. We are going to parts of Kabbalah that can be easily applied in practice. And so that doesn't require us to necessarily be 40 years old. There are certain parts of Kabbalah that I would not study if I were being the fact that I am not 40 years old, nor would I study them without a guide and a rabbi. As I said before, if you're studying the deeper dimensions of God and how God created the world, and you don't have the intellectual maturity nor the teacher to be able to provide context to what it is you're studying, to be able to put things in definition, so that you don't believe that God has two arms, but rather that just like you use an arm to extend to somebody, same too, God has certain aspects that extend, right, in his relationship with us and the world around us. And so you have to be able to study with that sensitivity, and that requires intellectual maturity. It also requires a guide and a teacher. When we study on our own, we are bound and limited by our own understanding. And if for whatever reason we have the wrong understanding, and of course, I apologize for that. If we don't have the correct understanding, the correct perspective, then we really have no way of knowing that, because we live only in our realm. And that is why studying something as sensitive as Kabbalah requires a guide and a teacher to be able to say, okay, Jack, you are close. That's kind of the idea, but it's a little bit more like this. That's very, very important. So can you study Kabbalah on Google? Well, let me ask you this. Can you go to a doctor on Google? Is it safe to simply go onto WebMD and take the symptoms you have and define what's wrong with you without going to a doctor? Oh, you might try that if you have a paper cut, but if somebody, God forbid, was stricken with a serious illness and you're talking about something that's very sensitive, of course you're going to go to a professional to make sure that you have the correct diagnosis, to make sure that you have the correct method of treatment. And the same thing applies when it comes to the study of Kabbalah. So while I think it's great that people learn online and they explore different ideas and so on and so forth, I myself love to do that. But when it comes to something sensitive, as studying Jewish mysticism, you must have a guide and teacher that's reputable, that's going to teach you Kabbalah as the correct perspective, the correct dimension of Torah study. Only then can you know for sure that you're not misinterpreting this very delicate subject matter. I just want to remind anyone that's tuning in that, again, you can chat with us. There's a group chat feature on the right-hand side of the page. You can ask any questions you might have there, or you can email them to me after. We're at askmendy@gmail.com. Now, if you do want to study Kabbalah further, and this is obviously a 4-week discussion, but it's only going to whet your appetite, there are great websites out there that have a vast array of Kabbalistic insight available. Chabad.org is one of the best, Chabad. There is KabballahOnline.org, Kabballah online.org. If you want to find a guide or a study partner, you can go to jnet.org. And if you're looking for books, reputable books on Kabbalah, you can go to Kehot, K-E-H-O-T. There are plenty of fantastic where you can further your study and exploration. And of course, I'm available to the best of my abilities. But it's important that you find the proper guide and mentor when doing that. All right, so why is it important to study Kabbalah? Because if this was something not taught publicly for so many years, for hundreds of years, this was something only taught in secret to a small, exclusive group of people. Why change that now? Why all of a sudden now is it so important that we seek to use these ideas, these very, very sensitive ideas, and teach them to the masses? Why do we now spend so much time using this in our educational platform? And why, if it's so important and so, did they not use it previously? All right, so step 1. In the Torah, it says, Da es Elokei avicha v'avdeu b'lev shalem, which means know the God of your fathers and serve him with a whole heart. What that tells us is that in order to serve God, you have to spend time trying to understand God. And that is what Kabbalah helps us to do. So it's not, obviously, practice and action is the most important, but study influences our action and enhances our action. And so we first of all understand that by studying and exploring even very deep and sensitive concepts, there's the power to enhance our everyday life and our everyday service of our Creator. So Kabbalah. Now, in addition to that, every week, as we spoke about, Kabbalah is the soul of Jewish study, the soul of the Torah. And each and every one of us have a soul. So when we live our lives, as we all do, hopefully we make good decisions, but invariably that are bad. We're going to make some bad decisions. It's going to happen. And when that happens, our soul is affected. You might make some bad decisions and your body is affected. You had some old Chinese food and you're not feeling very well, but that only lasts a day or two, and then you're back to normal. When you make a bad decision that affects your soul, right? If you had an opportunity to help your mother and you didn't, that can haunt you for a much longer time because the effect on the soul is much more profound. And so when a person experiences these moments in life, it becomes incumbent upon them to find a way to cleanse the soul, to rectify the tarnish of that soul. And Kabbalah helps us do just that. So as us, the Jewish people, get further away from the giving of the Torah, and as the darkness in this world in many ways becomes more obscuring and more challenging, and we experience more trials and life in a sense becomes more difficult. Sustaining a Jewish life becomes much harder, not because we're necessarily being persecuted physically, but because spiritually we don't see the light in the same way that we did previously. As that happens, it becomes more and more important for us to find a way to cleanse our soul. And Kabbalah does that because it is the soul of the Torah. It gives us the tools we need to shake off the dust from our soul so that we can recommit ourselves to our faith, to our traditions. We can go back out into the world and hopefully this time make the right choices, make the right decisions as we face our challenges every single day. So previous generations did not face the same level of temptation and desire that we face today. They didn't have the same accessibility that we have today. These are new challenges that face our generation and our children's generation in ways that no one ever had to. If you lived in a small shtetl in Poland or Russia, and you wanted to do something bad, you had to travel all the way to the big city to do that. Days and days on a train, by foot, horse and buggy, in order to be able to find an opportunity to transgress, to make a bad decision. Today, you need nothing more than the internet, a computer, and you instantly have access to many negative things. So life today has presented challenges far beyond anything our ancestors ever had to deal with. And as a result, now more than ever, we need a level of study, a level of Torah exploration that has the power to infuse our soul, to invigorate our soul, to cleanse our soul, both before we do something wrong and, God forbid, after as well. And that is why the study of Kabbalah has become more important now than ever before. Now, there's a parable that's told to highlight this idea about a king who had a son that was very sick, very, very sick. Now, the king wanted to heal his son and would do anything, absolutely anything, to bring his son back to good health. And he traveled far and wide looking for the greatest doctors, the greatest healers, the clue as to how he could bring his son back to good health. But alas, he could find no one until he found one doctor in a remote village that told him there is only one possible cure for your son. Very, very costly. You must take a special diamond, a special gem, a beautiful, beautiful gem, only of this quality, only of this caliber. And you must smash it. You must smash it until it is small smithereens. And then you must feed it to him. Mix it in water and feed it to him. And then, only then, does your son have a chance, a possibility of recuperating and recovering. And so the king turned to the doctor and said, I will do anything to cure my son. Tell me, where can I find this diamond? Where can I find this jewel? And the doctor turned to me and he says, the only one I know of in existence is the one in the center of your crown. Your crown, which represents your kingdom, your nobility, the thing most precious to you. You must take that diamond, smash it up into small pieces, and then mix it with water and feed it to your son. And only then is there a possibility that he may be nursed back to good health. Now you can imagine that the king didn't think twice. It came to the health and well-being of his son. He would do anything, sacrifice anything for his son. The same is for us as human beings. We are experiencing challenge, tragedy, violence on a scale we've never seen before. Yes, we've had wars throughout history, and nations have gone to war against each other from the beginning of time. Of the terrorism that exists today, the senseless violence that is happening around us, the lack of recognition of God, the lack of recognition or the value of human life. All of these things take us to our very core. And they require us to look for a cure. So God provides us the cure, the diamond in God's crown. Mysticism, the deepest secrets of the Torah are being made available to us because we need it in this difficult time to sustain us and help guide us to continue to make the right choices in life, to continue to make the right decisions. And when we think about it from that perspective, how can we not use this special tool to help us complete our mission? Another correlation between why we study the Jewish mysticism today, though it hasn't been studied previously. Of course, while everybody may be celebrating 2016, the Jewish calendar works very differently. And in the Jewish calendar, we are in a completely different year because we measure from the creation of the world. And therefore, based on that, we believe the world is 5,776 years old. So, in Genesis, the Torah tells us that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. There are many commentaries that lead us to believe that every day of creation corresponds to a millennia, because in the book of Psalms, King David writes, a day in the eyes of God is like 1,000 years. So if the first day of creation corresponds to the first millennia, second to the second millennia, and so on and so forth, we are now standing in the sixth millennia, just before the seventh Shabbat. And so Shabbat is the day we know as being entirely spiritual. That tells us that the world is getting closer to a time when God will be able to reveal himself in a more visible fashion, that the world will be so spiritual that we see and appreciate that godly energy that lies at the core of everything around us. And to prepare for that time, to prepare for that eventuality, we need to orient ourselves in a more spiritual fashion. We need to make ourselves with spirituality, with godliness, in ways that previous generations didn't. They didn't need to, because they were still further away from this upcoming special revelation. So whether you call it the Mashiach or not, regardless of the terminology you use, this time of spiritual revelation is going to require us to understand a different terminology. It's going to require us sensitive, more in tuned to this deeper godly energy that exists around us. And that is another reason why we have been required, obligated, if you would, to study Jewish mysticism, to prepare ourselves for what is coming soon. That basically wraps up our first lesson, just a little bit of an intro. Over the next 3 weeks, we will get into the timeline for Kabbalah, the fact that it was transmitted over generations, as the word Kabbalah itself means receiving, to receive, because it is something that was passed down, received from teacher to student, over the course of hundreds of years. So we'll talk about that further in the next few weeks. But we've begun that transmission between you and me has begun tonight. And I hope answer some of the misconceptions, giving you a little bit of a guide as to what Kabbalah truly is and what it is not. And hopefully you see the value in continuing to explore, because it really has the power, the potential to transform your life and empower you to make better decisions and feel more connected with your faith, with your spirituality, that you can live a more productive and accomplishing life here on earth. I'll finish off by just sharing an interesting quote. The New York Times recently said, just a couple of years ago, that Kabbalah is the #2 category of book purchases that's made currently. #2. That is an astounding statistic and tells us that there is something here, and by exploring it together, hopefully we will find the truth that lies beneath the surface. As I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at askmendy, askmendy @gmail.com. And I will see you again next Monday at 7:30 for lesson 2 of Kabbalah.